Sorry if I sound a little shit today, guys. I kinda have a cold. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from BT. It's untitled, but I'm going to refer to it as underscore. BT, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, producer of modern times. I don't even know where to begin with this guy. Everything he makes seems to just go beyond everyone else in the game. He's made some of my favorite albums of all time. Unbelievable amount of respect for this guy. I have no idea how he's managed to churn out so much amazing material over so many years. I reviewed the guy's Electronic Opus album last year, even though I kinda wish I didn't, because basically all you need to know is the concept, and anything else I said felt superfluous and nitpicky. I also did a first impression video on this album, when a partial digital version dropped about 2 months ago. You can check out those videos if you like, but in the meantime, I'll quickly recap my thoughts on his discography so far. It's solid, it's great, it's awesome, it's underrated. It's my second favorite album of all time. It's my 9th favorite album of all time. It's not as good as this Binary Universe, but still pretty solid. It's very relaxing. It's better than most trance producers could ever hope for. It's his greatest hits with an orchestra. Don't think any more explanation is needed there. So that brings us here, the guy's 10th album to date. Or 11th, depending on whether you count Electronic Opus. I personally don't, but whatever. So leading up to this new album, BT was going full-on hype machine mode. He was advertising this album as a straight sequel to This Binary Universe, and as we know, that album is my second favorite of all time. I was unbelievably hyped when he went on to say that it'd be 2.5 hours long, and there'd be 9 songs. And he further hyped me up by dropping 3 tracks on the album as a preview of sorts, acting as the digital version of the album, while the remaining 6 would have to be heard by purchasing this limited edition USB box set, which I have here, being sold for $50. I mean, it would be the highest quality audio, and there were 11 videos in 4K quality, so I figured, gotta be worth the money, right? And then just the other day, the USB arrived in the mail, and I finally got to hear what would clearly be BT's next magnum opus. How did it fare? Was it as good or even better than This Binary Universe? Well, no. Right on first listen, there were several aspects of this release that I've admittedly found kinda disappointing. And I'm just gonna go get those disappointing qualities out of the way right off the bat. Okay, first of all, this album is not 2.5 hours long, it's only 1.5 hours long. These Hopeful Machines was about 20 minutes longer than this is. I suspect when BT said we were getting 2.5 hours, he was including the videos in that as well. But when you add all that up, you get well over 3 hours. So I have no freaking clue where the 2.5 number came from. And I really hope BT wasn't lying to his fans in order to further get them hyped. I don't think even he would do that, to be honest, but this is the guy who said Electronic Opus was an idea that had never been done before, and that's not true. But whatever. This guy had my imagination running way too far, and I thought this album was going to have 9 tracks all over 10 minutes, and done in the style of This Binary Universe, but of course that didn't happen. There were 3 tracks in a row that didn't even break 4 minutes. And while I'm at it, the idea of all these 4K videos is an idea that works better on paper than it does in practice. I've been trying to watch them on my laptop, and VLC has been laggy as hell playing them because it can't handle the sheer size of the videos. 1080p would have sufficed for me, personally. As for actual music, well, there were 2 tracks that didn't really blow me away, personally. And, unfortunately, it was the first and the last track. Tokyo's a pretty good opener. Got a nice melody, gets you right in the mood for what you're getting into, but it's not as emotional as All That Makes Us Human Continues. It's not as epic as 13 Angels on My Broken Windowsill. It gets the job done as an intro track, but doesn't really go the extra mile, at least by BT standards. And the ending, 582. This is basically a Brian Eno style, or maybe like Juno Reactor Luciana style ambient excursion, focusing entirely on its spooky atmosphere for engagement rather than much in the way of actual progression. Again, not a bad track at all. It's fine for what it is, it's like a nice ambient piece to relax to, but given BT's championing this album as a follow-up to This Binary Universe, I was expecting more out of this 13-minute closing track. It's no Gathering Darkness, and it's certainly no Good Morning Kaya. So I suppose that would make this album kinda like the opposite of If the Stars Are Eternal. In my opinion, the first and last tracks on that album were by far the standouts, but here, the standouts are literally all the other tracks aside from the first and last one. The bad news is that the 3 tracks BT released already in the digital version are easily the best ones in the bunch, but the good news is the other surrounding tracks that I didn't already mention are all spot on. The 3 under 4-minute tracks may be short and feel like they finished before they got the chance to really get fleshed out, but that's not to say they aren't effective for the short time that they last. The Code of Hammurabi starts out with a big ambient pad before eventually evolving into this Asian-influenced track that reminds me a little bit of 1.618. Lustral has some awesome piano sections that remind me of the Internal Locus and parts of the Anti-Kythera mechanism, although with some occasional Asian flares as well. And Found in Translation starts out with all these ethnic violins before turning into almost this kind of suspenseful movie soundtrack theme. Songs like these make it pretty clear to me why the videos from this album are just drones flying over natural settings. But, of course, then that brings in the elephant in the room that is Artifacture, the 18-minute centerpiece of the album, divided into 9 movements which more or less serve as a map to explain what's going on in Italian, because classical music. Adagietto Granulare is waves of beautiful ambient pads. Nostra Luna de Miele brings in a bit more melody that kind of reminds me of the end of The Emergency a little. Guidate dalla Luce adds in some small rhythms. By the way, don't take my word for any of these Italian pronunciations. I'm not Italian, although granted BT isn't Italian either, so... But anyway, the song really starts to get going on the 4th movement, La Caduta con Moto, which is mostly beat-centric, and then even better in the beautiful 5th movement, La Vita Sotto il Mare, which is super atmospheric and has these choir-like pads that really give this section some texture. And then we get in Niente di tutto qualcosa, which sees Christian Burns and his family saying, "Sometimes I wonder if anything is real. Nothing. Everything. Something." This section admittedly sticks out like a sore thumb, as it's the only non-instrumental part of the entire album, and just seems to pause the momentum that Artifacture had going previously, but I can't say I'd want it removed either. The next movement just picks up where movement 5 left off, as if Christian Burns had never even been there. Then the rhythms change up again for the next movement, and then just kind of quietly turn into a smooth and almost SFTG-esque piece for the final movement. Artifacture is not the most emotionally rewarding song on this album for me, probably the second most, but it is by far the most interesting and the one that gets me thinking the most. Just a breathtaking song overall. It's also the only one of the 3 digital version tracks in which all of the movements have separate identities and can be, honestly picked apart. In the case of Indivisim and Omega, the movement names basically serve to point out Easter eggs and structure points, but those don't really feel like 7 and 9-part tracks, respectively, in their own right. Maybe 2 parts, or 3 parts, or something. I'll start with Indivisim, which is still my least favorite track of the 3 digital version tracks, but has grown on me a lot. The spelling of the name Indivisim bugs me, as I'm fairly certain there's an extra I in that word that shouldn't be there, but I digress. As I said, the song is mainly more like a 2-parter than a 7-parter. The first 6 all kind of blend together and form their own track, which does have a great melody and shows off BT's fantastic editing skills as usual. And as for the final movement, which is basically half the song, it sounds very different from the rest, much more ambient and dramatic and laid back. Indivisim may not be quite on the same level as This Binary Universe, but it has been getting better and better every time I hear it, and it's still a great song. But then there's Omega. And while it's not as complex or interesting as Artifacture, it is easily my favorite track on the album, reminding me much less of like This Binary Universe and much more of tracks like Les Nocturnes de Lumière from These Hopeful Machines. Sure, it's still laid out in the same way as a This Binary Universe style track, but that only adds to it even more. Like, the first couple of movements in this one actually do justify their separation. The first part's all glitchy, intense, build-ups to the super intense second part, which is mostly atonal, dubstep-like experimentation. The next couple of movements kind of blend together like the entire first half of Indivisim, but these sections comprise the parts that I definitely enjoy the most. It's got a fantastic melody, easily the best melody on the whole album. Heck, it's even got a little bit of that Asian influence in it too. I never really even picked it up until I started talking about it, but the Asian influence is all over this album. It's like this Chinese binary universe or something like that. But anyway, Omega just offers great build-up after great payoff several times, and it's just incredibly immersive and emotionally rewarding. There's also the final movement, which is covered in cascading synth melodies and weirdly ends in nothing but barely audible low-frequency noise for the last minute or so. Kind of odd way to end the track, but that's why Omega isn't on his next Song Across Wires. The only track left to talk about now is Chromatophore. Now, I didn't love this track on first listen, but just like Indivisim, it's also grown on me a lot with repeat listens. It's kind of like 582 in that it's entirely ambient and never really builds up to anything. But in my opinion, Chromatophore is much more interesting and immersive. It's basically like Zen music or something. You get like some koto and harp, some bubbly synth melodies over a backdrop of rain, and a very, very slow build-up, which later brings in some bass washes and electric piano lines. Although the build-up doesn't lead to a payoff, but instead just kinda stops and disappears into the distance. And now that I've discussed every track, I'd like to discuss my feelings on Underscore as a whole. I will admit, I was initially disappointed by this album. BT made me think I was going to get so much more than what I actually got. But as I started to turn it over in my head for longer and longer, I got more and more impressed by the final result. For one thing, this isn't a straight sequel or update to This Binary Universe in the same way Jean-Michel Jarre's Oxygen trilogy is. This album kind of does what If the Stars Are Eternal did, taking the spirit of This Binary Universe and applying it to different styles and atmospheres. Unlike If the Stars Are Eternal, though, Underscore pinned down the spirit and attention to detail of This Binary Universe way better, and especially on the digital version tracks. While I suppose there's a part of me that just wanted more of This Binary Universe, I'm sure that even that wouldn't have been totally satisfying, as I'd be pointing out that it's not unlike anything I've ever heard before. That's also true here, but Underscore is a beast all on its own that doesn't rely purely on my love for This Binary Universe. There's much more ambient here, and world music here too. As I mentioned, there's a lot of Asian influence to be found. Now, Underscore may not have been everything I hoped it would be, but it's still just as good as you could expect one of the best producers of our time getting his experimental mode on again. And I'm convinced that paying $50 for the full package was worth the money. I mean, I have CDs that were more expensive in my collection, quite frankly, but never mind. I'm overall feeling a solid 9 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.